At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Learn more at asuonline.asu.edu.
So I wanted, before we get started, to let everyone know that I have a new podcast out, and it's called Meditations. If you like the Meditations segment of this current podcast, you'll like the Meditations podcast. It's nothing but 20 minutes of meditative sounds. And now, on with the podcast.
Americans love scenery. We want to see it all, from one coast to the next, Mount Rushmore down to the Everglades. So hop into a Chevy Malibu and take the scenic route. It's the car you knew America could build. There's a place where people count on friendships they can trace back generations, where they can count on the same stool at the coffee shop waiting for them every morning. This place is called Glen Ellen, and you can find it in every bottle of Glen Ellen wine. This is craft brewed Herman Joseph's, the smoothest, easiest drinking specialty beer in the entire solar system. And I believe you'll find drinkable in the dictionary right after don't order a beer you can't drink. Zoingo! Boingo! The freestyle pogo with more boing, more bounce. Bounce further, bounce higher with Zoingo Boingo. To see what makes Arrowhead Mountain Spring water different from those other waters, you have to go back to the source. And with Arrowhead, that means going back a little farther and longer than most. Between security challenged and security strengthened, there's one important word: how. And it is the how that makes all the difference to our nation and our world. Lockheed Martin. We never forget who we're working for. What makes Kraft Singles so good? 2 out of every 3 kids don't get the recommended amount of calcium. But with Kraft Singles, they get a good source of calcium and the taste they love. Kraft Singles. Magic every single time. Throw boring overboard with a new real meal from Long John Silver's. A meal worthy of a plate. Just $4.99. Only at Long John Silver's. We may not all be geniuses, but we can all do something smart. Introducing the Hyundai 199 Sonata Lease. It's a smart deal on a really smart car.
And I agree with a lot of the stereotypes. You know, that's not what Irish people are. But the only issue I have is when you meet my grandfather, he looks like propaganda the Brits would use against us. He's worn a Peaky Blinders hat every day of his life. I have never seen the top of his head. I don't know if he has hair. He's a farmer. Well, he's a Catholic as well, and he's a farmer. He grows his own potatoes because he's like, we'll never let it happen again. His favourite drink is Guinness. He's obsessed with Guinness. He actually has his own seat at the local bar with his own arse print, and he goes there every day and he has his Guinness. When I was 15, my first ever job was in that bar, and the owner was like, you're going to pour your first pint of Guinness and you're going to give it to your grandfather. And he was like, it's going to be a beautiful moment. And then my grandfather sent it back.
Good morning. It's Friday, Jordan Peterson Friday, July the 25th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have the headlines, patriotic shorts, motivation, Bishop Barron, Ayn Rand, and Jordan Peterson. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. Now, my take.
I never thought I would see the day when the President of the United States marches into the headquarters of the Federal Reserve and lectures the chairman about his job performance. But there they were, Thursday afternoon. President Trump and Chairman Powell, they're standing next to each other, arguing in public. And yes, it was an argument. Trump said Fed renovations cost $3.1 billion. Powell shakes his head, clearly frustrated. He'd never seen that number before. You added in a third building, said Trump. Yes, said Powell, it was built 5 years ago. Never seen anything like that. I guess you could call it extreme transparency, because everybody could see this. This is the president's style. Pick an issue, discuss it publicly on live TV before a big audience. He does it almost every day. He was using the Fed visit to push for lower interest rates. That's a very simple message. Everybody understands it. He didn't drone on about quantitative easing. No, he got straight to the point. Powell, you're not doing a good job. Get interest rates down. He's drowning out the Democrats. Scandal stories get pushed out of the way when the president publicly lectures the most powerful central banker in the world. His approval rating, it's holding steady at 46%. Among Republicans, he can do no wrong. He gets 88% approval, 66% very strongly approve. That puts Jay Powell in a very difficult position. If he does lower rates, he'll be accused of capitulation. If he holds rates where they are, the attacks will likely escalate, undermining Powell's professional reputation. By the way, the Fed meets next week. At the end of his visit, Trump was asked what Powell could do to end the criticism. Well, said the president, I'd love him to lower interest rates. Other than that, what can I tell you? He walked away. Second hour of Varney, just getting started.
And that was my take. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the political corner.
Newt Gingrich joins us this morning. Newt, I've got to point out that Speaker Johnson thinks the big, beautiful bill will secure a win for the Republicans in the midterms next year. I think you agree with him. But my question is there anything that can get in the way of a big Republican win next year?
Well, I think it depends on the discipline of the Republicans in winning the argument despite the elite news media. I mean, the objective fact is, for example, the people who were taken off of Medicaid are mostly illegal immigrants, people who are cheating the system, and able-bodied adults who refuse to go to work. Well, it turns out on those three groups, the American people, by huge margins, favor what the Republicans did. Now, their problem is you have people like Hakeem Jeffrey, the Democratic leader in the House, who spent 8 hours and 40 minutes basically lying about the bill. The Democratic ad campaign basically lies about the bill. Talks about, for example, children with disabilities. No American children with disabilities are affected by the bill. So the Republicans have to remember Margaret Thatcher's rule: first you win the argument, then you win the vote. I'm convinced if Republicans have the discipline to communicate between now and next November of 26, they're going to win a Franklin Roosevelt scale victory and put the Democrats in very, very weak position.
And that was the political corner. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the patriotic short.
The deaths by gun violence. The average person hearing that pictures 38 to 40,000 murders. You must understand that figure includes criminals killed by police in the line of duty. It includes criminals killed in self-defense by their intended victims who fought back and prevailed. Which means every one of those, yes, it's a death. Yes, it's a death by a gun. Every one of those represents an innocent life saved. We also have to realize that that figure, that 38 to 40,000 dead by the gun, includes a minimum 60%, and some years as many as 2/3, that were suicides. And those situations, I respectfully submit, should be taken out of the mix. When the other side has to pad their arguments and we can show they've padded their arguments. We have taken a big bite out of their credibility.
I found most people.
And that was the Patriotic Short. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, motivation.
In this world, you're going to have trouble.
Life can be heavy. There are moments when the weight of the trials we go through, it feels unbearable. Pain can linger, and oftentimes we wonder whether we're ever going to feel whole again.
And the world will tell us if we're under something, like under pressure or undervalued, or we're under different areas in our life that are making us uncomfortable and it feels isolated and dark, that's the place where you should give up. That's the place that you should stop. You should go ahead and give up on that dream. You should go ahead and not study for that no more. You're always going to live in this community. Your mama's broke, you broke, and look at it. The thing you thought was going to make you wealthy, it just died. But know this, the place that is dark, that is lonely, and sometimes where the pressure of life is on you, that's the place that is making you.
That's where the growth takes place. That's where the work is. That's when life really reveals itself. That's when you discover your true identity.
Under does not mean over. And if you find yourself under pressure, undervalued, under attack, what it looks like is not what it is.
This failure, this catastrophe, if you aren't dead, then it's just psychological. It's in your head. As long as you don't surrender, as long as you don't give up, as long as you don't quit, then you haven't failed. It just means you've made a temporary tactical retreat. It means you've made a brief withdrawal so that you can regroup and reattack. As far as I'm concerned, if you get beat, unless you're dead, you are not defeated. And you have not failed. What you've done is you've learned. You've gained experience. Sometimes you have to take 2 or 3 steps back just to go forward again. Sometimes you might have to get a part-time job just to keep things going until you get back on track again. It's okay. It's happened to the best of us. It's all right. It won't break you. It only introduces you to yourself. But during those times, there was something in me that said, don't stop. Don't give up. Just keep on keeping on. And I decided that I wouldn't stop.
I want you to hold on. It may not happen in the time that you think is going to happen, but I want you to know something. If you quit, it's never going to happen. If you quit, if you give up, if you stop, if you do not persevere, you will never see it. I didn't get here through academics. I got here because I refused to quit.
What, you going to go through all this pain and quit? You going to go through all this suffering and stop?
You've come too far to quit now.
You should keep going. You should keep going. You already in enough pain. Get a reward for it.
Where you are is temporary. You will not be there for the rest of your life.
There's no guarantee that because somebody is now down on their luck, they can never come back. Who can guarantee that you can't make it? That you can't have your dream? Who can guarantee that you can't do what you want to do? No one can predict that. You don't know what the possibilities are for your life. You know the human spirit is powerful. There's nothing as powerful. It's hard to kill the human spirit. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a fighting chance. Whatever you go after, whatever you say, this is your stuff, pursue it passionately. Let there be a deep hunger in you that you won't be denied. And that when things happen, that they won't immobilize you, they won't deplete your energy, that you look at it and you observe it, but you know there's something in you that's going to take you to the top, and that this is only a temporary inconvenience. That's all it is. Nothing more can't stop you. Something as powerful as you cannot be contained. Don't go through life feeling like you're powerless. Victims are people that are powerless. You're not powerless. You are powerful. You direct the power in your life. Whatever your life is right now, it is a duplication of your consciousness. It's a result of how you have decided to use your power. That's all it is. That's not who you are. That's just a perverted use of your power that you aren't satisfied with. And you've got the power to change that. Wherever you are. How? I don't know. But I know you've got the power to do that. But you don't know what has happened to me. It really doesn't
going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, and you'll get more no's than you do yes. But when you hold out, things will begin to happen. You won't even understand how.
When you don't give up, when you don't let it break you, it breaks you through if you stay with it.
And that's a little motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little meditation. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now the Daily Stoic.
It's easy to get better, but better at what? So someone's good at taking down an opponent. That doesn't make them more community-minded or modest or well-prepared for any circumstance, or more tolerant of the faults of others. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations, 7.52.
And that was the Daily Stoic. And now, His Excellency Bishop Robert Barron.
Okay, politics and religion, stay away from those if you want to stay away from a fight. The woke culture has certainly exacerbated the situation because everybody is on eggshells. You know, it's like walking through an ideological minefield every time we open our mouths that we're going to be offending somebody. And then religion, are you kidding? Is one of the most volatile topics to bring up. So I do get that, you know, we're just afraid to say even that we're Christians. Well, the trouble is you just can't accept that scenario as a Christian because it's essential to our lives that we evangelize. You know, as Paul says, I mean, woe to me if I do not evangelize. Well, that's true of every baptized person. We're all prophets. We're commissioned to announce the gospel. A lot of the critics of religion.
And that was His Excellency Bishop Robert Barron. And now, the Ayn Rand thought of the day. Quote, "The spread of evil is the symptom of a vacuum. Whenever evil wins, it's only by default, by the moral failure of those who evade the fact that there can be no compromise on basic principles." Unquote. And that was Ayn Rand from the chapter, The Anatomy of Compromise, from the book, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now something called the Door Kick Challenge.
It's called the Door Kick Challenge. Youngsters terrorizing homeowners by kicking the front door and then running away. Social media is filled with videos showing teens causing havoc. Families across the country complain they're being frightened by kids kicking their front doors as hard as they can and then fleeing. One time could be scary enough, but one family says they've been targeted 18 times. Yes, 18 times. So now they're moving.
So the problem with this news clip here is that this guy doesn't assign blame. Again, we always wonder how come nobody's held accountable because we refuse to fix the blame. So these kids, do you think these are kids, teenagers that are being raised and have been raised throughout their lives by conservatives? Nope, not at all. These are kids that are being raised by liberal parents. And that's what this reporter should have mentioned. He should have said liberal teenagers or teenagers of liberal parents are running amok, kicking people's doors. Then it makes sense. But if otherwise, he helps by creating a sense of chaos. And this is what the left likes. They want to create a sense of chaos. The teenagers probably don't know that they're contributing to that and don't care. But again, these are kids that are obviously getting their cues from their peers, not from their parents. Because any kid who has any respect for their own parents and for their family isn't going to do such a thing. These are people that obviously have no respect for their own family, first and foremost, and then no respect for anybody that they in the neighborhood. So it is liberal parents that are at fault here. So that's the way he should have said it. Teenagers, kids of liberal parents, are running amok and kicking people's doors. Back in a minute. Thank you, Maria. Then Stu.
just before the opening bell sounds. Dow Industrials up 42, and the S&P and the NASDAQ right around record highs. Let's get some final thoughts here. John Lonsky.
Well, next week on Friday, we're getting the report on July payrolls. I think we're going to see a much smaller increase by payrolls compared to the month of June. Payrolls are up by 147,000 jobs. But let's not forget that in June, of that amount, 60,000 jobs came from public sector education. That's not going to happen again.
Yeah, we also have Apple earnings out next week. Cheryl.
Yeah, well, the Taj Mahal on the Mall, that's what they're calling the new Fed building. I'll be watching SNL tomorrow night with you, Maria.
Tommy, thanks for being here. Great to see you. Tommy Lahren, John Lonsky, Cheryl Casoni. Have a great weekend, everybody. I'll see you next week. Varney and Company picks it up. Stu, take it away.
All right. Good morning, Maria. Good morning, everyone. We're wrapping up another extraordinary week in the Trump presidency. Stock market records, a flurry of trade deals, a massive AI action plan, and Thursday, something no one expected to see. A public argument between the President of the United States and the Chair of the Federal Reserve. This was classic Trump. He complained about renovation cost overruns and Powell's refusal to lower interest rates. Powell didn't know quite what to say, but he looked very uncomfortable. He's in a difficult position. If he does cut rates, he will be accused of bending to political pressure. If he holds at current levels, the attacks will continue and Powell's professional reputation will be threatened. The Fed's rate decision comes next week. Not that much movement on the financial markets this morning, except in Bitcoin. You're looking at just $116,000. That's the price right now on Bitcoin. Dow Industrials, they're going to be a little higher, maybe 50 points on the upside, 5 to the upside for the S&P, 9 or 7 down on the NASDAQ. Not much change. Interest rates also little changed. The yield on the 10-year, 4.43. The yield on the 2-year Treasury coming in around 3.90. No, you're up to 3.94 right now. All right. Politics. New polls favorable to the president. It's a Fox poll, and it shows when asked which party deals best with major problems, Republicans have a 10-point lead over Democrats. Trump controls the narrative, and he seems to be just drowning out the Democrats. Ron claimed he was one of President Biden's closest advisors, and unlike some of the others, he did answer questions before Congress Thursday. He said Biden was less energetic and frequently mixed up names. Those problems got worse with time. He also said Hillary told him Biden was not politically viable. On the show today, how about a stock market melt up? The S&P 500, that's a broad-based indicator. It set a new record every day this week. Perhaps we are in a melt-up already. It used to be sell in May and go away, not this summer. The NASDAQ's up more than a third since April, and you'll hear our market watchers say there is more to come. Friday, July the 25th, 2025, Varney and Company is about to begin.
And that was a little bit of Maria and Stuart Varney. Nonprofit News Now. Back in a minute.
Thank you. And now from a book that's called Good Inside. What's the opposite of understanding? For this argument's sake, it's convincing. Convincing is the attempt to prove a singular reality, to prove that only one thing is true. Convincing is an attempt to be right, and as a result make the other person wrong. It rests on the assumption that there's only one correct viewpoint. And then my question is this supposed to be convincing? Further, convincing has one goal in mind, being right. And here's the unfortunate consequence of being right. The other person feels unseen and unheard, at which point most people become infuriated and combative, because it feels as if the other person does not accept your realness or worth. Feeling unseen and unheard makes connection impossible. Understanding two things are true and convincing one thing is true are diametrically opposed ways of approaching other people, so a powerful first step in any interaction is to notice which mode you're in. When you're in one thing is true mode, you're judgmental of and reactive to someone else's experience because it feels like an assault on your own truth. As a result, you will seek to prove your own point of view, which in turn makes the other person defensive because they need to uphold the realness of their experience. In one thing is true mode, exchanges escalate quickly. Each person thinks they're arguing about the content of the conversation when in fact they're trying to defend that they are a real, worthy person with a real, truthful experience. And again, is this convincing? Back in a minute. Thank you. So now an article from the Liberal Patriot called Non-Progressive Progressives by Roy Texeria. The Democrat Party is in sad shape by its own self-report and in the view of most observers. At the same time, the party is seemingly more progressive and more dominated by progressives than ever before. Are the two things related? Yes, they are, but not in the way most people think. The problem isn't that progressives have made the party too progressive. The problem is rather that today's progressives aren't really progressive in the true sense of the term, and as a result have led the party into a number of political cul-de-sacs that have nothing to do with progress and dramatically undermine its appeal. Consider, American progressives used to embrace a number of universal values and aspirations that defined their political project. They sought to make life better for ordinary people by emphasizing their universal interests across racial, ethnic, and cultural divisions, ensuring universal fair treatment in daily life and throughout society, promoting universal standards of merit, achievement, and truth, and providing universal access to the bounty from scientific achievement and economic growth. The core concept was that all Americans could prosper when treated in this fashion, and that existing social and governmental arrangements should be pushed in that direction. Making progress along these lines is what being a progressive was all about. Today's progressives are different. They have rejected the universal approach for particularistic defense of professional class cultural priorities and policy preferences. In that sense, they have lost the right to call themselves progressives. Instead, they now stand in the way of progress as progressives used to define it, and progress as most ordinary voters would recognize it. Here are some of the ways that progressives have bid farewell to progress. Colorblindness, anti-discrimination, and equal opportunity. The quintessential moral commitment of mid-century progressives was to make America's society truly colorblind. It was unfair and egregious that racial discrimination could truncate the life chances of black people and visit misery upon them. Therefore, progressives advocated and marched for ending discrimination and unequal opportunity. They won the argument. Not only was legislation passed to make such discrimination illegal, but anti-discrimination and equal opportunity became as close to consensual beliefs as you can get in America. Americans today believe, with Martin Luther King Jr., that people should not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. In a 2022 University of Southern California Dornsife survey, this classic statement of colorblind equality was posed to respondents. Our goal as a society should be to treat all people the same without regard to the color of their skin. That view elicited a sky-high 92% agreement from those surveyed. Similarly, a 2023 Public Agenda Hidden Common Ground survey found 91% agreement with the statement, all people deserve an equal opportunity to succeed, no matter their race or ethnicity. This is what those surveyed deeply believe in, equal opportunity, not, it should be noted, equal outcomes. And it is what progressives used to believe in, indeed mounted the barricades for. But a funny thing happened on the way to the 21st century. Instead of treating the colorblind society as a noble ideal that progressives should strive for, even if its perfect attainment is impossible, progressives lost faith in the ideal because racial disparities did not immediately disappear. Instead, they began to favor color-conscious remedies like affirmative action that went far beyond anti-discrimination and equal opportunity, and to oppose colorblind policies if they did not produce desired outcomes by race. As eventually formulated by Ibram X. Kendi,
Quote, there is no such thing as a non-racist or race-neutral policy. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. This inversion of traditional progressive principles is still with us today as progressives tenaciously defend affirmative action and DEI programs despite their lack of connection to consensual values of anti-discrimination and equal opportunity. Progressives view the very use of the term colorblind as right-coded evidence of supporting racism rather than opposing it. If they no longer support progress toward a colorblind society, in what sense do they still qualify as progressive? Merit and achievement. Progressives' traditional theory of the case ran like this. Discrimination should be opposed and dismantled and resources provided to the disadvantaged so that everyone can fairly compete and achieve. Rewards, job opportunities, promotions, commissions, appointments, publications, school slots, and much else would then be allocated on the basis of which person or persons deserved these rewards on the basis of merit. Those who were meritorious would be rewarded, those who weren't would not be. No more would people be rewarded because of who they were instead of what they accomplished. But 21st century progressives lost interest in the last part of their case, which undermines their whole theory. Merit and objective measures of achievement are now viewed with suspicion as the outcomes of a hopelessly corrupt system, so rewards should instead be allocated on the basis of various criteria allegedly related to social justice. Instead of dismantling discrimination and providing assistance so that more people have the opportunity to acquire merit, the real solution is to worry less about merit and more about equal outcomes. Equity in the parlance of our times. Arguments can be made in defense of the anti-merit approach. You can't swing a dead cat on most university campuses without hitting some progressive academic who will give you 10,000 words on why this is actually a great idea. In my view, these arguments are universally specious, but what shouldn't be debatable is that ordinary people, ordinary voters, don't buy the idea. They believe in the idea of merit, and they believe in their ability to acquire merit and attendant rewards if given the opportunity to do so. To believe otherwise is insulting to them and contravenes their common sense about the central role of merit in fair decisions. As George Orwell put it, one has to belong to the intelligentsia to believe the things like that. No ordinary man could be such a fool. If progressives no longer believe in helping individual progress, how is that progressive? The original progressive idea was to remove barriers so that people could accomplish what they're capable of, not to disregard the importance of accomplishment. A progressive society, a fair society, is one where people can count on the former, not one where they have to worry about the latter. Today's anti-merit progressives are no longer progressive because, in essence, they no longer believe in fairness. Free speech, cultural pluralism, and the open society. Progressives used to be steadfast defenders of free speech. Free speech was viewed as integral to advancing the progressive agenda against those who opposed that agenda and sought to suppress organizing efforts for social change. But the tables have turned, and now in the institutions where progressives dominate, such as the universities, the arts, NGO world, and the Democrat Party, the commitment to free speech has become very shaky indeed. Conflation of speech with violence and harm and making people feel unsafe has put a damper on the free expression of ideas. Today's progressives may be happy with the situation, but voters are not. They have a different model of discourse in mind, such as that suggested by this poll question tested from April to June 2023, over 18,000 registered voters by RMG Research. Quote, language policing has gone too far. By and large, people should be able to express their views without fear of sanction by employer, school, institution, or government. Good faith should be assumed, not bad faith. 76% of those surveyed agree, and 14% disagree. Progressives used to err on the side of free speech, not its suppression. They thought the universal open exchange of ideas would benefit their cause and was a fundamental progressive commitment. But as with a colorblind society, a funny thing happened on the way to the 21st century. Instead of judging ideas by their truth content, it became increasingly common for progressives to judge ideas by who was putting them forward. If the idea came from people in an oppressed, powerless, marginalized group, the idea should be supported. If not, it should be opposed. From there, it was a short step for progressives to consider ideas they disagreed with hateful or misinformation/disinformation, infected with racism or sexism or xenophobia or transphobia or whatever, and therefore not part of legitimate discourse. And therefore it was progressive to suppress the expression of those ideas wherever possible. The inversion of a traditional progressive commitment is shocking, especially since it undercuts cultural pluralism, which progressives hitherto supported. They believed that their ideas would freely prevail over the long haul because they were better, even if cultural traditionalists in the working class temporarily resisted. They could and would be eventually convinced. Today's progressives skip that step and now consider only their own culture acceptable. So today's progressives can be considered progressive when they don't really support free speech, cultural pluralism, and the open society. They cannot, and voters, especially working class voters, are unlikely to consider them so. Working class prosperity. Speaking of the working class, surely no goal was more important to progressives back in the day than promoting prosperity for the working class and disadvantaged. No longer. Progressives now prize goals like fighting climate change, procedural justice, and protecting identity groups above prosperity. This theory reflects what is now an overriding priority among today's progressives, action on climate change. But the working class is not especially interested in this issue and is predictably material priorities. More stuff, more growth, more opportunity, cheaper prices, more comfortable lives. They do not believe that progressives' green economy prescription will provide that. The question of growth is worth dwelling on. This is another funny thing that happened on the way to the 21st century. It used to be well understood that growth, particularly productivity growth, is what drives rising living standards over time. Some progressives have gone so far as to argue that our capitalist economy based on growth must be replaced with a degrowth economy focused on simple, healthy communities, efficient resource use, and the elimination of wasteful consumerism. Indeed, today's progressives are basically techno-pessimists. Progressives are now distinctly unenthusiastic about the potential of technology, tending to see it as a dark force to be contained rather than a force for good to be celebrated. Economists debate endlessly about the exact mechanisms connecting technology to growth and about the social and institutional conditions that must be met for technology to maximize its effect on growth. But at the end of the day, the growth we have seen and the living standards the mass public enjoys would simply not have been possible without the massive breakthroughs and continuous improvements we have seen in the technological realm. Given all this, progressives should logically embrace techno-optimism rather than techno-pessimism. If the goal is working-class prosperity, rapid technological advance is surely something to promote enthusiastically. There are two main reasons for progressives' current technophobia. One is that progressives simply underestimate the importance of economic growth, believing incorrectly that its social objectives are achievable with slow or even no growth. That leads naturally to an underestimation of the importance of technological change, since one of its chief attributes is promoting growth. Second, and worse, progressives now tend to regard technological change with dread rather than hope. They see technology as a force facilitating inequality rather than growth, destroying jobs rather than leading to skilled job creation, turning consumers into corporate pawns rather than information-savvy citizens, and destroying the planet in the process. Today's progressives seem to envision a socially liberal ecotopia of dense housing powered by renewable energy. This very much includes the progressive abundance advocates who are having a moment in the discourse. This is abundance as today's progressives envision it, not as working class people desire, who would prefer a big house in the suburbs with plenty of money and lots of nice stuff, and perhaps a quote, big-ass truck, unquote, or two in the driveway. Here, as elsewhere, progressives are dedicated to progress as they define it, not as normal people would, and as they themselves used to. The fact of the matter is that today's progressives have abandoned their former goals of universal uplift based on universal values and aspirations. That's why today's progressives are no longer progressive, except in their own eyes. And that was an article from theliberalpatriot.com, Today's Non-Progressive Progressives by Rui Teixeira. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, what does the phrase, if you're explaining you're losing, mean in debates? This was said by Ronald Reagan, speaking of political campaigns. From the perspective of your audience, if you have to explain yourself, you come off looking desperate to convince. As a consequence, you lose the high ground. From a more philosophical perspective, when you have a clear conscience and strong conviction towards the positions you take, your values, truth, and direction, you don't need the opinions or consent of others. As a consequence, you don't need to explain yourself. However, if you yourself are not convinced of the validity and truth of your position, or you can't fully justify your choices, then you continue to expel words in an attempt to create the illusion of certainty. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now from Jeffrey Mead on Instagram, the caption reads, "The average black woman in America is obese. Not curvy, not thick, obese. We've normalized dysfunction and call it culture. And what's even more crazy is we defend it. One word is needed, accountability." And he's right. He's absolutely right. The problem and the reason we don't have accountability is because we don't fix the blame. We have to fix the blame in order to have accountability. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the preamble to the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Back in a minute. Thank you, and now Jordan Peterson.
You know, it's a peculiar thing how people treat those who offer them the most, especially when it comes to narcissists. They'll devalue, dismiss, diminish. And why? Because confronting the truth of your worth means confronting the inadequacy of their character. See, the tragedy of the narcissist isn't that they lose you. It's that they never really saw you to begin with. And by the time they do, it's already too late. The narcissist is often celebrated for their charm, their confidence, their magnetism. But what people fail to recognize is how much of this persona is built on illusion. It's a carefully constructed mask, one that allows them to navigate the world without ever confronting their own vulnerability. And in that performance, they become experts at manipulation, experts at distortion, particularly when it comes to those who care for them the most. But this comes with a cost. They become blind to genuine value. They cannot see the very thing they most desperately need, even when it's standing right in front of them. When someone with a narcissistic mindset enters a relationship, whether romantic, familial, or professional. They enter it with a hidden premise that people are tools to be used, mirrors to reflect back the image they want to see. So when someone comes into their life who is grounded, empathic, resilient, someone who listens, who gives, who forgives, they don't respond with appreciation. They respond with suspicion. They see compassion as weakness. They see humility as inferiority. And worst of all, they confuse your generosity with obligation. They believe they are entitled to your goodness, as if you exist to reinforce their distorted sense of superiority. But you weren't weak. You were strong in a way they couldn't comprehend. You were steady, not passive. You endured not because you lacked self-respect, but because you hoped they would change, that they might grow into the person you believed they could be. And in that hope, in that investment of time and energy and care, you revealed the depths of your character. You gave them access to a kind of loyalty, a kind of presence that is incredibly rare, and they missed it. Not because you didn't show it clearly enough, but because they weren't equipped to recognize it. To the narcissist, real love is almost incomprehensible. It demands vulnerability, reciprocity, accountability, all things they are fundamentally unwilling to offer. So when you showed up with honesty, with emotional clarity, with patience, they couldn't meet you there. In fact, they likely resented you for it. Your authenticity highlighted their inauthenticity. Your emotional maturity cast a spotlight on their emotional immaturity, and rather than face that truth, they distorted it. They minimized your contributions, criticized your character, perhaps even tried to convince you that you were the problem. This blindness, this inability to recognize what they had, isn't accidental. It's strategic. It allows them to preserve their fragile self-immusion. Admitting your value would mean admitting their failure to honor it. It would mean acknowledging their own limitations, their own cruelty, their own dependency on someone they refuse to validate. And narcissists do not do well with self-confrontation. So instead, they build a narrative where you were never enough, where your boundaries were attacks, where your needs were burdens. But here's the thing. Deep down, somewhere buried beneath all that defensiveness and projection, there is a flicker of recognition. They knew you were different. They knew you were stable, loyal, kind, in a way that was not transactional. That recognition is part of what made them so reactive. It scared them, because if they allowed themselves to fully admit your value, they'd have to reckon with what that says about them and what they stood to lose. But they buried that realization. And when you finally walked away, or when the relationship collapsed under the weight of their dysfunction, they told themselves they were better off. For a while, they might even believe it. They distract themselves. They find new sources of attention, new people to charm, new illusions to feed. But eventually the pattern repeats. The superficial highs give way to emptiness. The validation they crave becomes harder to extract. And in that silence, in that loneliness, a thought begins to form. What if they were the best thing I ever had? But by then, you're gone. You're healing, you've rebuilt, and they're left with the echo of what they once dismissed. Their blindness wasn't just a failure to see your worth. It was a refusal to see their own wounds, their own need for control, their fear of intimacy. They couldn't receive what you offered because to do so would mean facing everything they've spent their lives avoiding. Your worth was never dependent on their recognition, no matter how much it felt that way in the moment. That's one of the most insidious aspects of being entangled with a narcissist. They train you, often subtly and over time, to see yourself through their distorted lens. They chip away at your confidence, not always with obvious insults or cruelty, but through quiet dismissals, invalidation, and a constant withholding of emotional attunement. They don't give you the mirror of healthy reflection. Instead, they give you a cracked one that warps your image just enough to make you question your own value. In the beginning, there's often admiration, even idealization. They may praise you, elevate you, make you feel like you're uniquely special. But that's not appreciation, that's strategy. It's the foundation of a dynamic built on control. Once they've secured your emotional investment, once you start depending on that praise for your sense of connection and self-esteem, they begin to withdraw it. They start to devalue, criticize, withhold affection, and introduce doubt. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to orient your sense of worth around their approval. You try harder, you overextend, you shrink, and you do all of it in the hope that you'll get back to the person they were in the beginning. not realizing that person never truly existed. What you're responding to isn't love, it's manipulation. It's a system designed to keep you in a cycle of hope and disappointment where your self-worth is constantly on the line. And because the high of their approval felt so intense, so affirming, the absence of it feels like a punishment. This is where so many people get trapped, in the belief that if they were just a bit more patient, more understanding, less demanding, more selfless, then maybe they'd earn back that affection. Maybe they'd finally be enough. But the truth is, you were already enough, and not in some abstract self-help way. You were enough because your value is inherent. It's not something to be measured by someone else's broken standard. The narcissist couldn't see your worth, not because it wasn't there, but because they were never looking for it in the first place. They weren't interested in your soul, your growth, your humanity. They were interested in control. They were interested in what you could give them emotionally without them having to give anything real back. And so the lie you began to internalize, that your value was contingent on their attention or affection, was a reflection of their dysfunction, not your inadequacy. When they ignored your needs, it wasn't because your needs were too much. When they minimized your accomplishments, it wasn't because those accomplishments weren't real. When they criticized your emotions, it wasn't because you were too sensitive. It was because acknowledging your depth, your intelligence, your strength, that would force them to confront their own lack of those things. What happens in this dynamic is a profound loss of perspective. You begin to forget who you were before their voice replaced your inner voice. You stop seeing yourself clearly, and that is one of the deepest harms caused by narcissistic abuse, the erosion of self-trust. But even in that erosion, even in the moments where you doubted yourself most, your worth remained unchanged. It was never tied to their perception. Their recognition or lack of it didn't define you, it revealed them. There's a kind of liberation that comes with reclaiming your identity outside of their narrative. It's not just about healing, it's about remembering. Remembering the parts of yourself that existed before the manipulation. Remembering that you were once someone who didn't need permission to feel proud, to speak up, to believe in your own goodness. The narcissist may have clouded that image, but they never destroyed it. You still carried that value quietly beneath the weight of their disapproval. Even now, in hindsight, when you reflect on all the times you gave more than you received, when you recall the moments you stood by them at your own expense, when you think of the energy you spent trying to prove your loyalty, all of that is evidence of your character, not their worthiness of it. You weren't lacking. You were overgiving. You weren't too emotional. You were emotionally honest in a space that punished truth. You were emotionally honest in a space that punished truth. And those qualities, the ones they tried to shame, are the very qualities that make you valuable beyond their comprehension. Their inability to honor your worth doesn't diminish it. It simply exposes the limitations of their perception. When someone with narcissistic tendencies begins to devalue you, it's often not because of anything you've done wrong. In fact, it's often a reaction to everything you've done right. Your empathy, your emotional intelligence, your willingness to show up authentically. These qualities can be deeply threatening to someone who has spent their entire life hiding behind a facade. For a narcissist, relationships aren't about connection. They're about control. And the moment they sense that someone sees through their mask or begins to challenge their narrative, they strike back, not with self-reflection, but with projection. Projection is one of the narcissist's most powerful and frequently used defense mechanisms. Instead of facing their own flaws, their insecurities, their deep-rooted fears of inadequacy, they shift the focus outward. They take what they cannot tolerate in themselves and attribute it to you. If they feel insecure, they accuse you of being needy. If they feel guilt, they say you're too sensitive. If they fear abandonment, they start claiming that you're the one pulling away or being distant. The devaluation isn't rooted in truth. It's rooted in their inability to cope with their own internal chaos. This is why being in a relationship with a narcissist can be so confusing. You start to question reality. You begin to doubt your memory, your intentions, your feelings. They criticize you for things you never said or twist your words into meanings you never intended. Over time, you start to carry shame that was never yours to begin with. And that's exactly what they want. Because the more you focus on defending yourself against their accusations, the less attention you give to their dysfunction. It's a kind of emotional sleight of hand. You become so occupied with proving your goodness, explaining your intentions, and trying to earn back their approval that you don't notice how much of yourself you're giving away. The narcissist creates a dynamic where you are perpetually on trial, and they are both the accuser and the judge. And every time you react, every time you try to explain or justify yourself, you reinforce their control. But behind this behavior lies a fundamental truth. Their devaluation of you has little to do with who you are and everything to do with who they are afraid of being. Narcissists often carry deep wounds, experiences of rejection, neglect, or humiliation that they've never processed. Rather than confront those wounds and heal them, they build an identity that denies vulnerability. They construct a self-image of superiority, perfection, and entitlement. But when confronted with someone who is genuinely strong, someone who leads with compassion, integrity, and authenticity, it threatens to unravel that false image. You, in your sincerity, become a mirror they cannot bear to look into. And rather than take responsibility for their discomfort, they try to shatter the mirror. They do this through gaslighting, blame shifting, silent treatments, and emotional withdrawal. They make you feel as though your pain is an inconvenience, your boundaries are attacks, and your needs are unreasonable. This isn't just emotional immaturity, it's self-preservation for them. They cannot face the truth that they are the ones failing to show up, so they construct a reality in which you are the problem. But no amount of projection can change the truth. Their accusations may sting and their silence may confuse, but underneath it all, they are simply running from themselves. The more you try to appease them, the more power they gain. And the more power they gain, the more distorted their version of you becomes. This cycle of projection and devaluation isn't about revealing who you are. It's about concealing who they are. It's important to recognize that many of the things they criticize in you are the very things they lack. If they accuse you of being dishonest, it's likely because they are hiding something. If they call you selfish, it's often because they are unable to give without expecting something in return. If they say you're weak, it's because your emotional openness exposes their emotional repression. Their words say more about their fears than your character. Understanding this dynamic is not about excusing their behavior, it's about reclaiming your perspective. When you begin to see their devaluation as projection, you stop taking it personally. You stop internalizing their shame and confusion. You begin to understand that their narrative is not your identity. Their judgment is not a measure of your value. And their inability to recognize your worth is not a reflection of your inadequacy. There comes a point in the narcissistic dynamic where the realization begins to set in, not for you, but for them. It doesn't happen in the heat of the breakup, and it rarely occurs while you're still emotionally available to them. Instead, it arrives in the aftermath, often long after the damage is done, when the narcissist starts to recognize what they let slip through their fingers. But this realization comes too late, and that delay is part of the consequence they inevitably face. The person they dismissed, devalued, and discarded turns out to be the person who held them together more than they understood. In the beginning, they see you as replaceable. In their world, people are interchangeable. Relationships are transactional. They believe they can always find someone else to fill the role you played. And because they confuse attention for affection and validation for love, they assume there will always be a new source of admiration waiting in the wings. They don't realize that what you gave them wasn't just surface-level praise. It was emotional labor, consistency, depth, and patience. These are qualities that can't be replicated easily, and certainly not by someone who only sees themselves through the lens of external approval. So they move on quickly, often visibly. They want you to see how unfazed they are, how easily they can replace you. They flaunt new relationships or distractions. They manufacture a narrative where they are thriving while you're presumably stuck in the pain they left behind. But underneath that performance is an emptiness they haven't yet confronted. They're not thriving, they're avoiding. They're not fulfilled, they're searching for the same emotional security you once gave them, without acknowledging that it was you who created it. And the problem is, they start to encounter people who aren't you, people who won't tolerate their games, people who mirror back their dysfunction rather than absorb it, people who don't see them as special or unique. Slowly, the charm begins to wear thin, and the emotional return on their manipulation starts to diminish. They realize that getting attention isn't the same as being loved. They notice that others don't show the same patience, the same emotional depth, the same willingness to understand. That's when the dissonance begins to grow. They start to compare. They start to remember. Not in the way a healthy person reflects on a lost relationship, but in a way that's tinged with entitlement and regret. They remember how you were there during their lowest moments, how you made excuses for their behavior, tried to understand their past, believed in their potential. They remember the times you reached out even when they shut down, the way you forgave things others would have walked away from. But they don't remember it with gratitude. They remember it with frustration because now that it's gone, they can't replicate it. They realize they had access to something rare and meaningful, and they threw it away not because it wasn't valuable, but because they didn't recognize the value when they had it. This realization, though delayed, is inevitable. It creeps in during moments of silence, when distractions no longer work, and when the admiration of others begins to feel hollow. It reveals itself when they're faced with consequences they can't manipulate their way out of, when people stop buying the charm, when patterns repeat, when loneliness becomes a chronic condition instead of a temporary state. And in that space, they are confronted with the truth they spent the entire relationship trying to avoid. They lost something real, and it was their own fault. By the time they understand what they had, you're no longer accessible in the same way. You've grown, you've grieved, you've rebuilt, and you've likely realized that the version of you who tolerated their behavior no longer exists. They want the old you, the one who didn't yet see through the manipulation, the one who kept giving without receiving. But that version of you was a chapter, not a destination. They don't get to go back because you've moved forward. Their realization isn't redemptive. It doesn't lead to meaningful change because the insight isn't born of empathy, it's born of loss. They want what you gave them, but they don't want to become the kind of person who can sustain it. That's the consequence. They understand the cost, but not the lesson. They want the reward without doing the work. And now they're left with a memory, a missed opportunity, and a narrative they can no longer control. Healing begins the moment you walk away, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. It doesn't always look dramatic or loud. Sometimes it's quiet, subtle, a slow internal shift that starts when you stop trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. That's when the real work begins. Not the work of forgetting them, but the work of remembering yourself. After enduring the confusion, gaslighting, and emotional exhaustion of a relationship with a narcissist, the path to healing starts with reclaiming the parts of you that were buried under their control. When you walk away, you might not feel immediate relief. In fact, what often follows is a kind of emotional detox. There's sadness, guilt, self-doubt, and even grief. Not just for the relationship itself, but for the illusion you held on to. You grieve the version of them you thought was real. You grieve the future you envisioned. But with every wave of emotion, something starts to shift. You begin to see the truth more clearly. The fog starts to lift, and what once confused you now feels more obvious. The inconsistency, the blame shifting, the way your needs were minimized, it all starts to make sense. In that clarity, the healing deepens. You start to question the beliefs that were implanted during the relationship. Were you really too sensitive, or were your emotions just inconvenient for someone who didn't want to be accountable? Were your boundaries really unreasonable, or did they simply threaten the control they had over you? As you unpack these questions, you begin to separate your identity from their narrative. You stop defining yourself by their criticisms, and you start recognizing how much strength it took just to survive that relationship. The narcissist thrives in an environment where you doubt yourself. So the moment you begin to trust your own perceptions again, the spell breaks. You no longer internalize their voice as your inner critic. You replace it with your own voice, one that is kinder, more patient, and grounded in reality. That shift is not just recovery, it's transformation. You're not simply returning to who you were before them. You're becoming someone wiser, more self-aware, and more attuned to what healthy love looks like. As you rebuild, the little things begin to matter. Peace becomes a priority. Silence no longer feels like punishment, but like sanctuary. You start enjoying your own company again. You engage with people who don't make you question your worth. You have conversations where you don't have to defend your feelings or shrink yourself to be accepted. These are signs that your nervous system is healing, that your emotional world is recalibrating. You no longer live in a state of constant hypervigilance, anticipating criticism or withdrawal. You're learning how to feel safe again, not just in your environment, but in your own skin. There's power in choosing yourself after being taught to prioritize someone else's needs at your own expense. You begin to recognize that self-love isn't indulgence, it's protection. It's boundaries. It's knowing when to walk away, not because you're giving up, but because you finally understand your own value. And that understanding reshapes everything. It changes the way you speak to yourself. It changes the relationships you allow into your life. It changes how you respond to red flags, not with justification, but with discernment. Healing also involves letting go of the fantasy that they'll change, that one day they'll wake up and realize what they lost, that the apology you always hoped for will arrive and it will somehow make things feel whole. But you learn that closure doesn't come from them. It comes from within. It comes from accepting that their inability to love you properly had nothing to do with how lovable you are. It was about their limitations, not your lack. And that realization frees you from the invisible tether that kept you hoping, waiting, doubting. The moment you walk away, you begin to gather the pieces of yourself they tried to scatter. Piece by piece, you rebuild. And in that process, you start to see that you were never broken, just misled. Your empathy was never a flaw. Your hope was never foolish. Your desire to make things work came from a place of integrity, not weakness. Healing reveals all of this, slowly and steadily, until one day you realize that you no longer feel the need to explain, justify, or prove yourself to anyone who made you feel small. There comes a time when the silence you once feared becomes the very space where your strength begins to echo. In the aftermath of being discarded, devalued, or emotionally dismantled by someone who could not see your worth, you begin to hear a different voice, your own. It's quiet at first, almost drowned out by the chaos they left behind, but it grows louder each time you choose not to chase, not to explain, not to return. It grows louder each time you choose yourself over the illusion they sold you. And slowly, the narrative starts to shift. You're no longer a victim of their manipulation. You're the author of your own story. The narcissist thrives on reaction. Their power is fueled by your confusion, your anger, your heartbreak. They bait you with silence, hoping you'll break it with a desperate plea. They drop breadcrumbs of attention to test if they still control your emotional world. And in the past, it may have worked. You may have felt compelled to reach out, to find closure, to understand. But at some point, you stop taking the bait, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. You realize that your energy is sacred and their chaos no longer deserves a seat at your table. That shift is not small. It's a profound moment of awakening. It's when you start living not in response to their behavior, but in alignment with your own values. It's when you stop rehearsing conversations in your head, wondering what you could have said differently. It's when you recognize that the only thing more exhausting than their presence was the weight of constantly doubting yourself around them. That exhaustion lifts the moment you give yourself permission to no longer care about their opinion. Not because you don't feel, but because you finally see the cost of giving them emotional real estate. This is where true confidence is born, not in the absence of pain, but in the decision to feel it fully and keep moving forward. Confidence is not loud or arrogant. It's steady. It's in the way you stop explaining yourself to people who never listened. It's in the way you enforce boundaries without apology. It's in the way you trust your gut, even when it goes against what you were once conditioned to accept. Confidence is what grows in the space they tried to fill with self-doubt. When the narcissist realizes you were the best thing they ever had, it doesn't come with celebration or growth. It comes with emptiness. They feel your absence not because they've changed, but because their new sources of validation fall short. They remember the attention, the support, the emotional grounding you gave them, not because they finally appreciate it, but because they missed the control it afforded them. They remember the way you forgave, the way you tried, the way you saw the best in them, but they remember it as something they lost, not something they failed to honor. And by the time they realize what they had, it no longer matters, because you've already outgrown the version of you that tolerated the bare minimum. You've stopped waiting for recognition from someone who only valued what you could do for them. You've stopped needing validation from someone who couldn't even validate their own feelings. And that self-possession, that unshakable sense of peace, is what they can't replace. The irony is that they finally see your value in your absence. But what they don't understand is that the version of you they're mourning no longer exists. You're no longer the person they could guilt into staying, silenced with criticism, or confused with mixed signals. You're no longer the emotional supply they can tap into when their ego feels bruised. You're no longer seeking closure from someone who benefits from keeping the door half open. You've closed that door, not with hatred, but with self-respect. There is power in the quiet. There is strength in choosing not to engage. There is liberation in being unbothered. And that stillness, that unwavering calm in the wake of their storm is what haunts them the most. Not your anger, not your sadness, but because when they realize they can no longer access your energy, your presence, your forgiveness, they are left to sit with the void they tried to fill with your suffering. And in that silence, the truth becomes undeniable. They lost something they will never replace.
And that was Jordan Peterson. And I play him and I like him because if you take the word narcissist, replace it with the word Democrat and the word empath, and then replace it with the word Republican, it opens up a whole new world. Try it. Back in a minute. Thank you. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that subjective individualism is your idea.